London, February 1942. It's the height of the Blitz, and the city was a place of devastation and darkness. The unrelenting bombing, and the population was gripped by fear. But there was another menace lurking in the dark shadows of the Blackout. Over the period of 6 days, 6 women were attacked, of whom 4 were murdered. There was a serial killer on the loose, who the press dubbed the Blackout Ripper, since the bodies of the deceased women were severely mutilated. On Monday morning, the 9th of February, the body of 41-year-old pharmacist Evelyn Hamilton was discovered by an electrician called Harold Batchelor in a street-level air raid shelter in Montague Place, Marylebone. Her clothes had been disarranged and her scarf wound around her head. Scuff marks on her shoes and broken sections of plaster scattered near her body indicated Hamilton had fiercely struggled with her attacker, who had raised her skirt above her hips and pulled her underwear below knee level. Her handbag containing approximately 80 pounds had been stolen, although some of the contents were found scattered on the pavement outside. Her empty handbag was later found by a police officer on nearby Wyndham Street. No fingerprints were recovered from any of her possessions. Her body was identified by her landlady, Catherine Jones, the following day. Just prior to her murder, Hamilton had resigned from her job managing a chemist shop in Hornchurch, which had experienced financial hardships due to the onset of war. At 6:40 p.m., the day before her death, she is known to have informed Mrs. Maud Yoxall of her plans to leave London and travel to Lincolnshire the following day, as she had been offered a manageress position at a pharmacy in Grimsby. She was last seen alive by a waitress at the Lions Corner House in Marble Arch shortly before midnight, drinking a glass of white wine to celebrate her 41st birthday. The location of her body led investigators to conclude she had been either accosted or attacked as she walked back to where she lived in the early hours of the following morning. Hamilton's post-mortem revealed she had been strangled by a left-handed individual. She had not been sexually assaulted or mutilated, although numerous small cuts and scratches had been inflicted on her body, and a cut measuring 1 inch had been inflicted to her left eyebrow. Around 8:30 in the morning the following day, Tuesday the 10th of February, 2 meter readers discovered the naked and mutilated body of 34-year-old Evelyn Oatley, lying on a bed in her flat at 153 Wardour Street. She had been beaten about the mouth and chest, then strangled into unconsciousness before a 6-inch cut had been inflicted to her throat, severing her right carotid artery. Her abdomen and thighs had been extensively mutilated with a razor blade and a tin opener after death. A pair of blood-smeared curling tongs was also found close to her body, and a blood-stained razor blade lay to the left of her head. The contents of her handbag were strewn across the floor of her bedroom. The door to her flat had been closed, but not locked. No defensive wounds were found on her hands or arms. Detective Chief Superintendent Frederick Cherrell was able to determine that fingerprints recovered from the blood-stained tin opener and on the corner of a broken section of mirror found in Oatley's handbag, which had also been used to mutilate her body, indicated that her murderer was a left-handed person. No match for this set of fingerprints could be found on the police fingerprint register, indicating that Oatley's murderer had no police record. She was a married woman who, at the outbreak of World War II, had turned to prostitution, using the alias Nita Ward to supplement the income she earned as a nightclub hostess. 3 eyewitnesses later informed investigators Oatley had been approached by a young, clean-shaven airman with chestnut brown hair, approximately 5 foot 8 inches in height, outside a restaurant in Shaftesbury Avenue, late in the evening prior to her murder. According to these witnesses, when Oatley had asked the person what his preferences were, he had simply replied, "I like blondes." Oatley was last seen alive by a fellow tenant named Ivy Poole, who saw her enter the stairwell to the property in the company of this individual at approximately 11:40 p.m. According to Poole, shortly after midnight, she was woken up by the sudden increase in the volume of Oatley's radio. In the early hours of Wednesday the 11th, a 43-year-old prostitute named Margaret Lowe was murdered in her flat at 11 Gosfield Street, Marylebone. She was last seen alive by her neighbour, Florence Bartolini, at approximately 1:15 a.m., walking along the corridor to her flat in the company of her client. Bartolini later heard the man leave and walk down the corridor and out into the street, whistling to himself. Lowe's body remained undiscovered until the afternoon of the 13th, when her 15-year-old daughter, Barbara, visited only to be told by a neighbour her mother had not been seen for 2 or 3 days, and that a parcel had remained unclaimed outside her door for the same length of time. Lowe was found on her bed beneath the quilt, which was raised to just below her chin. She had been extensively beaten, then strangled to death on her bed with a silk stocking, which was still knotted beneath the right side of her jaw. Frost was visible around her nose and mouth. Performing the post-mortem on Lowe's body, forensic pathologist Sir Bernard Spilsbury remarked that the injuries inflicted by a murderer were quite dreadful, adding that the perpetrator was a savage maniac who indulged in a wicked lust to perpetrate the most diabolical injuries on the woman he killed. The mutilations inflicted to Lowe surpassed the savagery of those her murderer had inflicted on Oatley, with some done while the victim had still been alive, although at the point of death. Her body had been extensively slashed and mutilated with a variety of implements, including a razor blade, a vegetable knife, a table knife, and a poker, all of which were found protruding from or beside her body. Her abdomen had been opened, exposing her internal organs. Spilsbury was also able to determine the injuries inflicted to Lowe's body left little doubt her murderer had also been responsible for the death of Evelyn Oatley. Forensic experts recovered fingerprints from the base of a glass candlestick standing on the bedroom mantelpiece, plus a glass tumbler and a half-drunk bottle of beer, also found at the crime scene. The fingerprints were found to belong to the perpetrator's right hand, indicating that the killer was left-handed. Lowe was a widowed mother of 1 who hailed from Southend-on-Sea. Following the death of her husband in 1932, she had sold the family shop. She later enrolled her daughter in a boarding school before relocating alone to London, where she was employed as a house cleaner in 1934. Using the alias Peggy Campbell, she began to engage in prostitution. On Thursday the 12th, a stranger came across a 25-year-old prostitute named Catherine Mulcahy in Regent Street. Mulcahy, who sold sex using the alias Kathleen King, agreed to take him to her flat in nearby Southwark Street. The two travelled there by taxi, and she was given the agreed fee of £2 in advance. At the flat, Mulcahy lit the gas fire and began removing her clothes, but did not remove her boots. She later stated a strange smile appeared on the man's face as she removed her clothing and lay on the bed Beckoning him to join her, he removed his clothes, then approached Mulcahy and slammed his knees into her stomach and attempted to strangle her as he pinned her body to the bed with his own weight. Mulcahy fought her attacker, kicking his stomach with her boot and breaking free of his grasp. She then ran screaming from her flat to the house of a neighbour, possibly as a means of deterring Mulcahy from reporting the assault to the police. The man dressed himself before approaching her neighbour's flat and gave her a further 8 £1 notes, stating, "I'm sorry, I think I had too much to drink this evening," as Mulcahy repeatedly shrieked her belief he was a murderer. The man then grabbed his coat and fled. Soon after this attack, the killer encountered 32-year-old Doris Jouanet. She was last seen alive at around 12:20 p.m. on the 12th of February by a friend named Beatrice Lang. According to Lang, Jouanet said she intended to visit a regular client, who she referred to as the captain. The two then parted company in Oxford Street. Shortly afterwards, Jouanet encountered a man, accepted his proposal, and took him to the 2-room ground floor flat at 187 Sussex Gardens in Bayswater that she shared with her husband. The following evening, her husband, Henri, returned to the flat. Finding the bedroom door locked, he unsuccessfully attempted to pry the door open before phoning the police, who dispatched a constable named William Payne to the property. Telling Henri to remain in the hallway, the policeman prized the door open and turned on the light, discovering Jouanet's body, which was naked, lying diagonally across the bed. A stocking was knotted around her neck. The shock constable left the room, telling Henri, "I must advise you not to go in that room." He then contacted Paddington Police Station to request the station officer alert Scotland Yard's Criminal Investigation Department and the divisional surgeon to his grim discovery. Detective Leonard Clare arrived at Sussex Gardens soon after. Looking at the body at the crime scene revealed Jouanet's jaw had been broken before she had been strangled with the stocking knotted beneath the left side of her chin. Her abdomen and thighs were extensively mutilated with a razor blade and knife, in a similar manner to the bodies of Oatley and Lowe. The knife used to mutilate her had been placed on her thigh. A pattern was emerging, and these attacks were perpetrated during the long, dark hours of the wartime blackout, in order to evade detection. A gold watch and approximately £5 had been stolen from the flat. Pathologist Sir Bernard Spilsbury conducted the autopsy at the Paddington mortuary on the 14th of February. Examining the spillage of blood from Jouanet's wounds, Spilsbury was able to determine that the victim had been strangled to the point of death before her murderer had started to mutilate her before she died. All other wounds had been inflicted after death. In reference to the nature of the wounds to the victim's body and the locations they had been inflicted, Spilsbury noted the murderer had exercised a degree of calculated restraint when disfiguring his victim, but that he had worked himself into an evident frenzy when inflicting the other wounds. Jouanet was known to resort occasionally to street-level prostitution. She had married her husband, who had previously been a client of hers, in November 1935, and had remarked to other West End prostitutes that she would only sell herself when she needed a few extra shillings to supplement the money given to her by her elderly husband, who managed a hotel in Sloane Square. She would engage in prostitution when her husband slept overnight at work, as his employment frequently required him to do. Due to wartime restrictions on newsprint, the murders initially received only limited press coverage, but they quickly became the prime topic of conversation among West End prostitutes, many of whom became increasingly reluctant to offer their services to individuals they did not consider regular clients. On the 13th of February, the bodies of both Lowe and Juanet were discovered, just hours apart, and both were soon linked to the murder of Evelyn Oatley. The murders became nationwide headlines. When darkness closed in on the evening of the 13th of February, a man got into conversation with a young married woman named Margaret Hayward in Piccadilly. After sharing a drink and a sandwich at the London Trocadero, the two walked in the direction of Haymarket. Hayward later stated that, at this point, the man became unpleasantly forward towards her, pushing her into a doorway near Piccadilly Circus and groping her as he attempted to persuade her to accompany him to a nearby air raid shelter. Hayward consented to a single kiss before saying, "In any case, I wouldn't go in one with you." She remonstrated against his actions as she hit at his wrists and pushed his hands away from her body, then attempted to leave. In response, she was seized by her throat and pushed back into the doorway, and was then strangled into unconsciousness as the attacker repeatedly muttered the words, "You won't." Luckily for Hayward, as he rifled through her handbag looking for cash, he was disturbed by an 18-year-old delivery boy named John Shine, who was carrying bottles of beer into the nearby pub, forcing the man to flee the scene. But in his haste, he left behind his RAF-issued gas mask and haversack in the doorway. Shine immediately ran to Hayward's assistance. Seeing that she had regained consciousness, he then offered to accompany her to a hospital. En route, the couple encountered a policeman named James Skinner, who suggested the two come with him to West End Central Police Station to provide witness statements detailing Hayward's attack, before an officer accompanied her to a nearby hospital. It later came out that soon after his attack on Hayward, the perpetrator went to a nearby pub where he realized he had left his gas mask and haversack at the site of the attempted murder, and that the service number printed on the inside of his haversack could be traced back to him. Before providing his witness statement at the police station, Shine handed the gas mask and haversack to investigators, explaining he had recovered the items from the doorway where he had found Hayward, who insisted the items had been in the possession of her assailant. Detective Sergeant Thomas Shepherd noted down the RAF regimental number, which was 525987, printed on the inside. Shepherd immediately contacted the RAF police, who in turn contacted the regiment in Regent's Park. A staff sergeant quickly ascertained the items had been issued to a Gordon Cummins. This information was relayed to Sergeant Shepherd at 11:30 p.m, with the staff sergeant adding, "Cummins was not in his quarters." So, who was this Gordon Cummins? He was born in Yorkshire in February 1914, the first of 4 children. His father was a civil servant and his mother a housewife. As a child, Cummins received his education in Llandovery in South Wales, where he was known for being more preoccupied with socializing than his studies, and had a poor academic record. He attended Northampton College of Technology for a time, and aged 18, moved to Newcastle, where he took various jobs but had a poor employment record. In October 1934, he moved to London and obtained a job in a clothing factory, earning £3 a week, and later trained to be a foreman at the site. In London, Cummins developed a desire to live the high life. He frequented hotels and clubs in the West End, falsely claiming to acquaintances to be the illegitimate son of a peer, and also claiming to receive an allowance from this fabled individual. To support this contention, Cummins refined his accent to imitate that of a university graduate, and insisted on being referred to as the Honourable Gordon Cummins. He frequently engaged in acts of theft or embezzlement to financially maintain this facade, and regularly bragged to colleagues of his sexual excursions with local women. To his employers, his extravagant lifestyle impacted his work, and he was fired from his job in February 1935. He then volunteered to join the Royal Air Force and enlisted at the Air Crew Reception Centre in Regent's Park in London, where both serving members of the RAF and new recruits were assessed for training. He initially trained as a rigger, tasked with undertaking flight checks on aircraft. He was regarded by his superiors as an ambitious individual, although his boastful attitude and false claims of nobility made him unpopular with his fellow servicemen, who derisively nicknamed him the Duke. In May 1936, Cummins met Marjorie Stevens, the secretary of a West End theatre producer, at an Empire Air Day event. After a 7-month romance, they got married at Paddington Register Office on the 28th of December. They had no children. He had various postings around the country in the lead-up to World War II, and during April 1941, he was posted to Cologne in Wiltshire. Here he reached the junior rank of leading aircraftsman, although he had held aspirations to become a Spitfire pilot. During November 1941, Cummins was posted to Cornwall. He joined a Falmouth social club named the Blue Peter, and occasionally assisted the manageress by tending the bar. He was relieved of his bartending duties within weeks, when found to be serving free drinks to RAF personnel. Shortly after, the manageress discovered that approximately £35 worth of jewellery had been stolen from her flat. Although both she and the local police suspected Cummins of committing this theft, no evidence was found to prove his guilt. The following January, having accrued over 1,000 hours of flight experience, Cummins appeared before the RAF Selection Board to take an exam. His exemplary performance earned him a transfer to the Aircrew Receiving Centre in Regent's Park in London, where he was to be stationed with 300 other men. Detective Sergeant Shepherd formally questioned Cummins on the morning of the 14th of February. He protested his innocence and claimed he had spent the evening drinking beer with a corporal, whose name he could not recall, before engaging in conversation with a woman. He further claimed to not only hold vague recollections of his conversations with her due to his intoxication, although he did claim to have a hazy recollection of walking down the street in her company, before realizing in the early hours he had violated his curfew and immediately returned to his base. He claimed to have no memory of attacking Haywood. When asked why the knuckles on his left hand were cut and bruised, Cummins claimed to have received the wounds while doing maintenance on a plane engine. He was arrested and held on remand on a charge of causing grievous bodily harm. The police looked at the entries in the barracks logbook, which showed that Cummins had reported back to base before 10:30 p.m. on the dates of the murders and attempted murders that the investigators had put down to the Blackout killer. It was noted that the entries had been written in pencil, meaning the record in the book could easily be altered. Several of Cummins' entries for the month of February were incomplete, as although he had invariably signed the logbook when leaving, he had frequently failed to sign in upon his return. Questioning of his fellow airmen revealed they had been in the habit of vouching for each other's comings and goings. The police also discovered Cummins and another airman named Felix Sampson had left their quarters via a fire escape after midnight on each of the dates in question, and both had not returned to the base until the early hours of the morning. A search of Cummins' possessions revealed he had taken various items belonging to the murder victim as keepsakes. One of these had been a white metal cigarette case engraved with the initials L.O., which had belonged to Evelyn Oatley. Traces of blood were also recovered from a shirt retrieved from his kit bag and the inner surface of his belt. An examination of the trouser turn-ups of his military uniform revealed traces of a distinctive brick dust mixture found at the air raid shelter where Evelyn Hamilton's body was discovered. A fingerprint of his left little finger and thumb were matched with prints found on the tin opener and broken mirror found near the body of Oatley. The police also later confirmed fingerprints recovered from 2 other crime scenes belonged to Cummins. At the time of his arrest, he had neither a previous criminal record or a known history of violence. He insisted that he had never encountered any of the murder victims and claimed to be unable to recognize their photographs. When presented with the victim's personal belongings recovered among his own possessions, Cummins claimed the items had been taken from a gas mask case I was carrying when arrested, but which was not mine. He then recounted his claim that he had either picked up the wrong haversack or that another airman had switched them with his. Unconvinced of Cummins' claims, the police charged him with the murders of Oatley, Lowe, and Journet. He was held on remand at Brixton Prison to await trial. He was further charged with assaulting Hayward and Mulcahy. On the 27th of March, he appeared before a judge at Bow Street Magistrates Court, where he was further charged with the murder of Evelyn Hamilton. He was tried for the murder of Evelyn Oatley at the Old Bailey, which began on the 27th of April 1942, and he entered a plea of not guilty to the charge of murder. He seemed uninterested in the legal proceedings, occasionally chatting in a light-hearted manner with his lawyer, or turning to smile and wave at his wife, who steadfastly believed in his innocence. In the opening statement, the prosecution outlined the discovery of Oatley's body, the injuries inflicted, the weapons her murderer had used to perform the mutilations, and the fingerprints recovered at the crime scene. Sir Bernard Spilsbury, the pathologist, testified that the cause of death had been a deep cut to her throat, that Oatley would have bled to death in less than 5 minutes, and that death had occurred at approximately 12:30 a.m. on the morning of the discovery of her body, although the actual time of her death could have been up to 2 hours before or after this time. Cummins chose to testify in his own defense, and he denied any culpability in Oatley's murder, insisting he had been in the company of another woman at the time in question, before returning to his barracks. He had admitted having been in Oatley's company shortly before her murder, but had insisted she had been alive and well when he had last seen her. He also claimed to have been too drunk on the evening of her death to recall the actual timings of his whereabouts or actions. With completion of both counsel's closing arguments, the judge, Mr. Justice Asquith, delivered his final instructions to the jury, saying, "A sadistic murder has been committed here of a ghoulish and horrible type. What you have to determine is whether, upon the evidence, it has been proved beyond reasonable doubt that the murderer was the man who stands in the dock. His life and liberty are in your hands, but in your hands also are the interests of society." His address lasted for more than an hour, with the judge outlining key points presented by both prosecution and defense. At 4 p.m., the jury retired to consider their verdict. Just over half an hour later, the jury returned to the court. Each juror avoided making eye contact with Cummins as they filed back in. When asked by the clerk as to their verdict, the foreman replied, "Guilty of murder." Cummins displayed no emotion as it was read out, although his wife burst into tears. He was then asked whether he had any legal reason or cause as to why the court should not impose the penalty of death. In response, Cummins replied, "I am completely innocent." He was then formally sentenced to death by hanging. The judge stated, "Gordon Frederick Cummins, after a fair trial you've been found guilty and on a charge of murder. As you know, there is only one sentence that the law permits me to pronounce, and that is you be taken from this place to a lawful prison, and thence to a place of execution, and that you there be hanged by the neck until you are dead, and may God have mercy on your soul." Following his conviction, Cummins was held in the condemned cell at Wandsworth Prison to await his fate. He lodged an appeal, but this was turned down in June. His wife and family were unwavering in their belief of his innocence and visited him on a frequent basis until his death. He was executed by Albert Pierpoint at Wandsworth Prison on the 25th of June 1942. Contemporary news reports indicate Cummins was given a glass of brandy to calm his nerves. He then walked stoically to the scaffold, flanked by 2 warders, without offering any resistance. The entire execution process lasted less than 2 minutes. He is the only convicted murderer in British criminal history known to have been executed during an air raid. His body was buried within the confines of the prison. But the story does not quite end here. Charges relating to the other murders remained on file, and Scotland Yard investigators later stated they strongly believed Cummins had murdered all of the women. He was also suspected of 2 earlier killings. In October 1941, the first suspected victim was a 19-year-old clerk named Mabel Churchyard, who was murdered on the 13th of October. She is known to have frequently engaged in casual relationships with servicemen. Her nude body was found by workmen in a bombed house on Hampstead Road the day after her murder. She had been strangled to death by an individual described by the pathologist who examined her body as being left-handed, as the bruising around Churchyard's neck indicated her murderer had more strength in his left hand than his right. Her handbag had been emptied of anything of value. Her death is believed to have occurred at approximately 9:15 p.m. 4 days later, a 48-year-old widow named Edith Humphreys was found lying on her bed at her Regent's Park home. She had been extensively bludgeoned on the face and head before her assailant had attempted to strangle her before cutting her throat. Humphreys had also suffered a single stab wound to her skull, which had penetrated her brain. She was still alive, but died shortly after her admission to hospital. The door to her property was ajar, and investigators found no sign of a forced entry to her home. Several items of jewellery had been stolen. At the time of these 2 murders, Cummins was stationed at the Cologne base, although when on leave, he is known to have frequently visited London, residing at an address in nearby St John's Wood.